Good evening, friends, fiends, and night owl supremes. Welcome to A Bit Late. I do hope you're in the mood for a short story tonight, a short fairy tale as it were, and this evening we'll be reading The Witch in the Stone Boat from the Icelandic tale collected in the Yellow Fairy Book. So, as usual, get some covers, cats, any animal familiar really, put some water on the boil for that tea or coffee or hot chocolate, probably make that with milk or water. Sometimes you just gotta use what you have for that one. Marshmallows too. Wow, I'm getting cold and hungry at the same time. But without anything further, let's get into tonight's story. The Witch in the Stone Boat. There were once a king and a queen, and they had a son called Sigurd, who was very strong and active and good looking. Good to know. When the king came to be bowed down with the weight of years, he spoke to his son and said that now it was time for him to look out for a fitting match for himself, for he did not know how long he might last now, and he would like to see him married before he died. It's very candid, Dad. Sigurd was not averse to this, and asked his father where he thought it best to look for a wife. The king answered that in a certain country there was a king who had a beautiful daughter, and he thought it would be the most desirable if Sigurd could get her. Oh, I heard she's pretty. I think you should try to go for her. Okay, Dad, sure. So the two parted, and Sigurd prepared for the journey and went to where his father had directed him. He came to the king and asked his daughter's hand, which he readily granted him, but only on the condition that he should remain there as long as he could, for the king himself was not strong and very able to govern his kingdom. Sigurd accepted this condition, but added that he would have to get leave to go home again to his own country when he heard news of his father's death, whenever that may be. After that, Sigurd married the princess and helped his father-in-law to govern the kingdom. He and the princess loved each other dearly, and after a year a son came to them, who was 2 years old when word came to Sigurd that his father was dead. But his dad wanted to see the child. Kind of a bummer, no? Sigurd now prepared to return home with his wife and child and went on board ship to go by sea. They had sailed for several days when the breeze suddenly fell, and there came a dead calm, at a time when they needed only 1 day's voyage to reach home. Sigurd and his queen were 1 day on deck when most of the others on the ship had fallen asleep. There they sat and talked for a while and had their little son along with them. After a time, Sigurd became so heavy with sleep that he could no longer keep awake. So he went down below and lay down, leaving the queen alone on the deck playing with her son. The setup makes me nervous. A good while later, after Sigurd had gone below, the queen saw something black on the sea, which seemed to be coming nearer. Oh no. As it approached, she could make out that it was a boat, and she could see a figure of someone sitting in it, rowing it. At last the boat came alongside the ship, and now the queen saw that it was a stone boat, out of which there came up on board the ship a fearfully ugly witch. The queen was more frightened than words can describe, and could neither speak a word nor move from the place so as to awaken the king or the sailors. The witch came right up to the queen, took the child from her and laid it on the deck. Then she took the queen, stripped her of all her fine clothes, which she proceeded to put on herself, and then looked like a human being. Last of all, she took the queen, put her into the boat, and said, "This spell I lay upon you, that you slacken not your course until you come to my brother in the underworld." Oh no. The queen sat stunned and motionless, but the boat at once shot away from the ship with her, and before long she was gone out of sight. When the boat could no longer be seen, the child began to cry, "Mom's gone!" And though the witch tried to quiet it, she could not manage it, so she went below to where the king was sleeping with the child on her arm and awakened him, scolding him for leaving them alone on deck while he and all the crew were asleep. It was a great carelessness of him, she said, to leave no one to watch the ship with her. I mean, anything could have happened. A witch could have boarded. Heavens knows, right? Sigurd was greatly surprised to hear his queen scold him so much. A whole sentence worth, right? For she had never said an angry word to him before. But he thought it was quite excusable in this case and tried to quiet the child along with her, but it was of no use. Then he went and wakened the sailors and bade them hoist their sails, for a breeze had sprung up and was blowing straight towards the harbor. They soon reached the land which Sigrid was to rule over, and found all the people sorrowful for the old king's death. But they became glad when they got Sigrid back to the court and made him king over them. The king's son, however, hardly ever stopped crying from the time he had been taken from his mother on the deck of the ship, although he had always been such a good child before, so that the king at last had to get a nurse for him, one of the maids of the court. As soon as the child got into her charge, he stopped crying and behaved well as before. I wonder. Do you wonder why? We'll see. After the sea voyage, it seemed to the king that the queen had altered very much in many ways, and not for the better. He thought her much more haughty and stubborn and difficult to deal with than she used to be. Before long, others began to notice this as well as the king, even though they had never met her, by the way, right? Maybe she was just really mean and no one could stand her, and they're like, oh, here's an excuse to complain about her. We'll pretend she's changing. I don't know how courts work back in the day. In the court, there were two young fellows, one of 18 years old and the other 19, who were very fond of playing chess, and often sat long inside playing at it. Their room was next to the queen, and often during the day they heard the queen talking. So the nerds are always in their room, never going outside. This is perfect. They get to hear everything the queen says. I love it. And nerds in the best way, just as cool. One day they paid more attention than usual when they heard her talk, and they put their ears close to a crack in the wall between the rooms and heard the queen say quite plainly, "When I yawn a little, then I am a nice little maiden. When I yawn halfway, then I am half troll. And when I yawn fully, then I am troll altogether." What? Interesting. As she said this, she yawned tremendously and in a moment had put on the appearance of a fearfully ugly troll. Then there came up through the floor of the room a three-headed giant with a trough full of meat, who saluted her as his sister and set down the trough before her. She began to eat out of it and never stopped till she had finished it. The young fellows saw all this going on, but did not hear the two of them say anything to each other. They were astonished, though, at how greedily the queen devoured the meat and how much she ate of it, and were no longer surprised that she took so little when she sat at the table with the king. As soon as she had finished it, the giant disappeared with the trough by the same way he had come, and the queen returned to her human shape. Cool. Also makes me realize the Sleeping Beauty Queen wasn't that far out there. Now we must go back to the king's son after he had been put in charge of the nurse. One evening, after she had lit a candle and was holding the child, several planks sprang up in the floor of the room, and out of the opening came a beautiful woman dressed in white, with an iron belt round her waist, to which was fastened an iron chain that went down into the ground. The woman came up to the nurse, took the child from her and pressed it to her breast. Then she gave it back to the nurse and returned by the same way she had come, and the floor closed over her again. Although the woman had not spoken a single word to her, the nurse was very much frightened, but told no one about it. "Oh, Mom comes back from the underworld." So the witch's brother and the mother come up from the underworld to feed the living, or to feed the people living in the above world. Kinda cool, kinda symmetrical. Next evening, the same thing happened just as before, but as the woman was going away, she said in a sad tone, "Two are gone and only one is left," and then disappeared as before. The nurse was still more frightened when she heard the woman say this and thought that perhaps some danger was hanging over the child, though she had no ill opinion of the unknown woman, who indeed had behaved towards the child as if it were her own. I wonder. The most mysterious thing was the woman saying, "And only one is left." But the nurse guessed that this must mean that only one day was left, since she had come 2 days already. I wonder if she never has seen the queen, so she wouldn't recognize the woman coming up from the floor feeding the child. Maybe she never leaves the room. At last the nurse made up her mind to go to the king and told him the whole story and asked him to be present in person the next day about the time when the woman would usually come. The king promised to do so and came to the nurse's room a little before the time and sat down on a chair with his drawn sword in his hand. Soon after, the planks of the floor sprang up as before, and the woman came up, dressed in white, with the iron belt and chain. The king saw at once that it was his own queen, and immediately hew asunder the iron chain that was fastened to the belt. This was followed by such noises and crashings down in the earth that all the king's palace shook, so that no one expected anything else than to see every bit of it shaken to pieces. At last, however, the noises and shaking stopped, and they began to come to themselves again. The king and the queen embraced each other, and she told him the whole story, how the witch came to the ship when they were all asleep and sent her off in a boat. After she had gone so far that she could not see the ship, she sailed on through the darkness until she landed beside the three-headed giant. The giant wished to marry her, but she refused, whereupon he shut her up by herself and told her she would never be free until she consented. After a time, she began to plan how to get her freedom, and at last told him that she would consent if he would allow her to visit her son on earth 3 days on end. This he agreed to, but put on her this iron belt and chain, the other end of which he fastened round his own waist. And the great noises that were heard when the king cut the chain must have been caused by the giants falling down the underground passage when the chain gave way so suddenly. The giant's dwelling indeed was right under the palace. Wow, how convenient. And the terrible shakings must have been caused by him in his death throes. The king now understood how the queen that he had had for some time past had been so ill-tempered. He at once had a sack drawn over her head and made her to be stoned to death, and after that torn to pieces by untamed horses. Wow, this is harsh. The 2 young fellows also now told what they had heard and seen in the queen's room, for before this they had been afraid to say anything about it on account of the queen's power. Sure, guys, sure. You could have saved lives, but don't say anything, I guess. Maybe it was a really involved chess game, though. The real queen was now restored to all her dignity and was beloved by all. The nurse was married to a nobleman, and the king and queen gave her splendid presents. The end. Well, friends and fiends, that was quite a story. I did get the creeps when the queen went into the stone boat, because I had feelings and thoughts of it being a coffin and she was going to the underworld, but I think that the theme was there. Death and dying, I don't know. I'm glad that she's not, though. I'm glad she's back. I do wonder, though, why she didn't just say anything to the nursemaid like, hello, I'm the actual queen, please go get my husband, the king, so he can see me and I'll explain everything that happens. Instead, she sort of just left it to chance that he'd be there the third night, and trusting that this nursemaid would go tell the king. I mean, the chess guys didn't say anything, so why would the nursemaid? So much to chance. So much to chance. But it all worked out in the end, so a happily ever after to this tale, excepting the witch and her brother, the three-headed giant. But I do hope you enjoyed the story and that your mind is now at peace or at ease. You're ready to take on the day or the sleep, or just relax and enjoy life. But now off to sleep and dream what you will, or stay a while and enjoy another tale. Whichever you choose, I'll speak to you again. And until then, stay spooky, my friends. Sweet dreams.